Okay, here we're ready to start installing our sealing rings. Now I have these two conventional O-rings. These are not D-rings, they're just O-rings. And of course obviously that top groove is for the snap ring. So there we have the first one, no problem. Of course it'd be a disaster if I left one of these out, and of course we don't want to do that. And here we come in with the second one, no problem. All right, now here the largest of the O-ring is going to go on this piston. And there it slips nicely in the groove. Now this is actually a D-ring, it's not an O-ring, so I want to make sure that it's oriented correctly. And as it is, it slips nicely down in the groove without any problem. There we go. Now, I'm going to have a D-ring that goes here on the center, and we can see, the flat edge is going to go out into the groove, and the D section is going to face inward towards the sealing surface. And there we go. Just carefully position it. And once I've got it positioned, it snaps right into position. Okay, now here this is a D-ring. Look at it carefully. This is the smaller piston. Goes in the groove nicely. And then we have the return piston. Has another D-ring. Slips into position nicely. And then we have this D-ring here. Now, one thing I like about the Toledo kit is that they put the rings for a specific assembly in separate plastic bags that are sealed, which you have to cut open, obviously, when you get ready to use it. And so, obviously, if you have a ring left over or a seal left over, you better look carefully to see if you missed something, and also kind of compare it with the number that you removed. As you can see, that's not falling correctly into its groove, so I need to go ahead and correct that. Make sure it's going smoothly there into the corresponding groove. Okay, so here I'm ready to install the large piston. We have, of course, the new D-type sealing rings, carefully lubricated. Now remember, there's an orientation here, and if you forget to mark it, then what you can do is just simply look at this opening has to go towards the bottom of the case, there towards this apply port. And they're just very easy to slip together, and it went together no problem. And after you put it together, you can turn it. Even after you've got it all assembled with the spring in there, you can still turn it. It's kind of hard to do, but you want to make sure that your alignment's correct. And you'll know your alignment's incorrect because remember, this will only slip in one way in the case, both the piston and the lower housing. So if you have this at some strange angle, you won't be able to install it. Okay, here I have carefully assembled the assembly, and I have the smaller piston and the return piston, and you'll notice that the return piston, the bleed hole is right up there in the top, and you'll notice that the spring retainer will only allow me to install it when I have that positioned correctly. So now I'm ready to go ahead and install the diaphragm spring and then the spring retainer. Now we're going to use our special balm tool, and there I have a pilot that exactly fits the bottom of the housing. I want to go ahead and just set the snap ring into the approximate position. I'll go ahead and position the spring retainer, and then we'll run down our bolt. Now normally I would do this over on the foot press, or use the snap press or the arbor press, but this actually works nicely, and when I'm able to actually do this operation without any heavy equipment. So here I'm gently compressing the diaphragm spring, and then I'll use my snap ring pliers to spread the snap ring and drop it in position. Okay, here I'm using the snap ring pliers, and as you can see, this is a snap-on set. This is a nice one. It seems to work very nicely for what we do here. Used on all different types of automatic transmissions. Just carefully push the snap ring in position, and that worked out very nicely. Kind of position it so it looks good. Nicely seated all around. The special tool makes the job especially easy, and go ahead and take loose the bolt, and voila, everything is positioned correctly. Now, down here in what we were talking about, if this isn't exactly right, you'll notice that if you hold it stoutly, you'll actually be able to turn this slightly. So if it's not exactly where you want it, you can grab it and turn it. But this looks good. Everything is in position. There, our bleed is at the 12 o'clock position. Now, I'm going to go ahead and load up our clutches. Here is my cushion spring, and again, this is a dish type cushion spring. The dish down, I can see the witness mark clearly where it's been bearing against the piston. And then we're going to alternate the steel, friction, steel. There I can actually see the Mercedes part number right there on the friction. Notice that these steels are actually internal spline, a little different kind of from what they normally do with the steels, where normally the frictions have the internal and the steel has the external spline, but it doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't. Now you'll notice one thing that's interesting is that this friction turns against this steel, but it stays stationary against the back plate. That's why, of course, I see that there never was any movement between the two, and there we see the witness mark there from the pattern of the friction clutch. All right. And then we go ahead and install our snap ring. And we can again look at the witness mark on the snap ring to see how it was actually installed. Not that it makes any difference. Okay. Now, this actually is going to slide down over the output shaft. There we go. And here's my two Torlon sealing rings and my apply port there for the sun gear clutch. I guess it was the K3, K2 clutch there on the inside. And there you see all my plates are aligned correctly. Now I don't have any type of thrust bearing here because remember, the output shaft is going to be solidly locked to the case through this ball bearing. So that ball bearing is going to lock it real nice, so no problem. Now here's the other set of clutches. These will actually go down in the case, but we can actually slip them here over the transmission, just kind of a test fit, see how they go. And again, as I look at the clutch, very nice. There we see the original Mercedes part number. No problem. These clutches are good for hopefully another 100,000. Now what you'll notice in many automatic transmissions is some clutches are more prone to wear than others. In other words, if I have a clutch assembly that's only applied in reverse or the higher gears, it's not subjected to as much torque as the initial breakaway and rapid acceleration in the lower gears. So that's going to kind of affect their life too. But all the clutches in this transmission were in good condition. All right. Okay, now here we have this dish plate again, and here the witness mark is clearly showing me how it goes up against the piston. Now if you're going to air check this, that's fine. You can air check the small clutch on the inside and also pass air through the Torlon seals there to the inner clutch, but be careful. Don't apply pressure to this port because there's nothing to retain the larger piston. So it really put a stress there to our spring. But of course, after we have it in the case, we can test it very nicely. All right, now the parking gear. There we go, gently. Come on now. Okay, it's going to slide right down. And now, we talked about this earlier, but we're going to stress this now. The actual thrust on the Mercedes 722.6 is going to be defined by these shims. Now what I've done is I've used a paint mark to show me the shims that are going to go between the parking gear and this ball bearing. And this should be just a slip fit here over the shaft. There we go. Now on this particular unit, I did have a shim that went between the output yoke and the bearing. That's usually not there, but it was here. And then here we actually have the output, and the customer left the guibo on the yoke, which is fine. Won't hurt anything. There we go. And then I'm going to have obviously the snap ring that retains the bearing in the case. And there we have our 12.30 millimeter nut that's going to be torqued there. I myself usually don't stake it. What I do is I clean this thoroughly and I use Loctite blue. And I try to position it exactly where it was when I took off. And of course, obviously, I'm checking the torque to make sure I have a good torque there. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull this off. Okay, here we're ready to continue the assembly of the transmission. I've removed the bearing from the case, and now what I'm going to be doing is loading the B2 brake down in the case, which is a very simple operation. Okay, here I'm going to load the parking gear. Now you'll notice I do not have a bearing in the case. That's going to go from the other side. So I don't have to worry about the shims right here. I'm going to put them in from the other side. So here I'm installing the parking gear. Now I'm ready to slip this assembly into position. It's just a slip fit into the case. Make sure you have this line correctly. There's really only one way this can go. So let me go ahead and line it up. And there we go. Slips right down into position.